Welcome to Annapolis Mosaics. Our program spotlights people in our community who are involved in activities designed to promote good human relations. I am Michael Keller, the chair of the Annapolis Human Relations Commission and your host. The Commission is a city board that seeks to promote equal opportunity and to eliminate discrimination. My guests today are Phil Favero and Will Candler of the Climate Stewards of Greater Annapolis. Gentlemen, welcome to Annapolis Mosaics.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike.
Well, last fall, you got on a bus with 50 others for a trip to New York City to take part in the People's March on Climate Change. Why did you travel so far to do that?
Well, we took advantage of an opportunity. We were not part of organizing the march, but we were approached as to our interest, and you're right, we were able to put together a busload of people from the Annapolis area, and with some help from the Climate Action Network and others, we were able to go to New York. It was a spirit building kind of experience, I would say. Hopefully it'll do some good. There were certainly a lot of people there. There were about 400,000 people in the march. And we had one 80-year-old from our Climate Stewards group who pushed his walker all the way, about 5 miles, I would say. Yeah.
Well, what motivated 50 people to actually get on a bus and go to a march in New York City? I mean, you think about people going to demonstrations and to marches. It's usually in D.C. or in Baltimore, but all the way to New York. This is something that really you must have felt really strongly about to do this.
We do, and we did and we do feel strongly. New York was a venue because of a meeting at the United Nations on climate change after the march. But yes, we do feel strongly. We're quite concerned about global warming, about carbon pollution in the air, and about the implications for human civilization. Some very obvious problems already arising, like flooding in the Annapolis area, but much broader and even more concerning implications from this carbon pollution that we're experiencing.
Right. Well, the ride was organized by the Climate Stewards of Greater Annapolis. And what's the purpose of your group, and how did it get started? Because it's fairly new among the environmental organizations here in the community. So what makes you stand out in terms of the work that you're doing vis-a-vis the other environmental groups? And, how did it come about?
Will, you want to speak?
No, you have a very good
right.
explanation,
All
starting
right.
with the Quakers.
Yes. We
Quick.
So Will and I are part of Annapolis Friends meeting, and as Quakers are wont to do on occasion, if an issue arises, they make a public statement about it, and it requires a consensus kind of process, unity in the meeting. We did that around climate change, beginning, the process took about 6 months, as I recall, so a year and a half ago. And a number of people from the meeting were involved. The ending portion of that minute, of that public statement, said, we pledge to do something about this problem. So from there we decided, well, we should do something. And we reached out to other organizations, other faith communities, through the Greater Annapolis Interfaith Network, and directly to some people. And on that basis, we recruited, the email list at that time was about 30 people. So people from different faith groups, as I mentioned. United Church of Christ was one, Unitarians, and people without that kind of background were attracted. So we've been meeting since then for about a year now. We've been in existence, yeah.
Mention a little bit about when you actually meet.
We meet typically on the fourth Thursday of the month. We can move that if there's reason to do that. Fourth Thursday, 7 to 9 p.m. at the Annapolis Friends Meeting House. We also have occasional educational programs. For example, a recent one on flooding in Annapolis.
Which is joint. It was joint with...
We were joint in sponsoring that with the Severn River Association. And we had a speaker from the Union of Concerned Scientists, a glaciologist actually, spoke about the ice evidence that indicates that we'll have a serious flooding problem in Annapolis with not only nuisance flooding, which was her main focus, but also with the risk of storm surge flooding, given the rise of the sea level in the area.
We also had a very interesting lobbying effort with John Sarbanes, which we felt was extremely good, in conjunction with the Union of Concerned Scientists, and he was excellent. He spent 25 minutes with us solidly, and he asked, are we past the tipping point? And that's such a perceptive question that we felt very, very pleased, and very pleased to be there with a glaciologist from the Union of Concerned Scientists. So we did our little thing.
Well, the Senate voted 98-1 to acknowledge that the planet is warming. Well, no debate there. However, the Senate did not act on the issue that is generating controversy, and that is the role that humans have had and the impact that the burning of fossil fuels has had in global warming. And a recent poll found that there's a really great difference between scientists and the general public on this issue, specifically the question of whether climate change is caused by human activity. That was the question that was asked. Is climate change caused by human activity? 87% of the scientists said yes. 50% of the general public said yes. It's a complicated issue. So, Will, I'm going to call on you, since you are the author of a book on this subject, Global Warming, The Answer. Could you give our viewers a brief primer on this issue and specifically look at that relationship between climate change, global warming, and the burning of fossil fuels? What do people really need to know?
Well, now the first thing that people have to know is, or recognize, they know it, but they have to recognize it, that we've been doing a huge geoengineering effort to get so much carbon up into the atmosphere. You think of the coal, natural gas, and oil that we've burnt in order to make more carbon in the atmosphere. We've gone from 280 parts per million to 400 parts per million. Everybody knows that. But when you look at it and you realize that was geoengineering. A lot of people say now we mustn't do geoengineering, but we've been doing it. We're in the middle of a huge geoengineering experiment. And it is, sure enough, having its effect. Even the Senate can see that we've got global warming, except that it's having an effect. Everybody knows, well, since 1859, John Tyndall discovered that carbon dioxide interfered with infrared, and that therefore it's a insulator in terms of the world, globe, Earth losing energy. And if it if it doesn't lose enough energy, then it has to heat up. The energy is left with us. That's what's going on. And okay, the other important thing to bear in mind is that we have what's called a biological carbon cycle, that plants in the spring take in carbon dioxide to form plant material with sunshine, and then that either gets eaten and the carbon dioxide gets back out, or they rot and the carbon dioxide gets out. So every year we have intake or breathing, if you like, in a way, of the carbon dioxide in and then back out again. And it stays in a cycle. When we burn fuel, we add to the cycle. We don't, and that stays there. That's do for a start, eh?
I would tag on one point to Will's explanation, and that is it'd be excellent at this point to show a graph. I don't have one, but the correlation between the carbon dioxide and the Earth's temperature is dramatically similar. So there's a very strong correlation, and as Will said, the level of carbon dioxide has gone up to approximately 400 parts per million, which is a level at which the Earth has not experienced for 800,000 years. And it suggests warming, it suggests sea level rise as a result of land ice melting. So this strong correlation between carbon dioxide and temperature is dramatic.
We're going to take a break now, but when we return, we're going to talk with Will Candler and Phil Vivero a little bit more about the science of climate change. We're talking today with Will Candler and Phil Vivero, members of Climate Stewards of Greater Annapolis. We've just talked a little bit about the differences between the views of scientists, the views of the general public on that key question: do human beings impact the changing climate that we're facing? Do you believe that the science is conclusive on this issue? There's debate on this. Do you believe that the science is conclusive that human beings are making the planet warmer as a result of their behavior?
Well, quite frankly, a large part of the reason there's a debate is that the mass media love to have a debate. As soon as there's no debate, they're out of business. And there's a debate still on those grounds as to whether it's a flat Earth or not. But there isn't any question about it. Okay.
I know that, I think you mentioned 87%, I believe it's actually 97% of scientists are in agreement that the Earth's temperature is rising and that humans are the cause of this happening. I think science always has its dissenters. That's the way science progresses, is questioning theories and retesting. But I think 98 or 97% is about as close to unity as you're going to find among scientists.
Okay, so you believe that the burning of fossil fuels, oil, natural gas, coal, is the nub of the problem. Is that correct? I'm saying that.
No, it's far worse than that. It's that our president doesn't understand the problem.
Okay,
that's the basic.
Okay, all right. But here's, assuming that let's make the assumption that the real nub of the problem that we face is the burning of fossil fuels. I mean, that's the nub of the problem. But people are dependent on these fuels to travel, to heat and cool their homes, and to perform other daily activities. What do we do?
We have to shift. It's quite simple. If the prices indicated that fossil fuels were more expensive, we would spend much more time getting wind and solar power. And indeed, if you're faced with the problem of closing a nuclear plant or a fossil plant, you should close the fossil plant. And indeed, if you push me and we can't get enough energy from solar and free things, then we have to build nuclear. It's that bad what we're doing with the fossil fuels.
Yeah, you know, with the fossil fuels, though, you're dealing with these price fluctuations. That's true for oil, it's true for natural gas, certainly for coal. As the prices can fluctuate wildly. Most people are familiar with the price of oil. I mean, people don't catch the others. But if you look at the price of oil, that thing gyrates around. It can get to very high levels, get to over $100 a barrel, as it did just a few months ago. And it can plummet down below $50 a barrel, which we've seen just recently. Well, I think during the 90s, it actually fell to $10 a barrel. And on top of that, the so-called experts are always wrong. I mean, the people who make a living out of predicting the movements of the futures markets in the energy area are dead wrong, including people from some of these major investment banks that pay people great money to do this. So the bottom line is that people's behavior are impacted by the price. Sure. When the price is very high, you can make arguments for alternative energies. People say, okay, yeah, hybrid, that's a great buy. Mm-hmm. Right now, with oil at a much lower level, if you reach a point where oil is a much lower level, people say, oh, I can buy the gas guzzler, you know, and people have a very short mindset. Right. So what do you do? I mean, doesn't this sort of make it hard to persuade people to use less fossil fuels when you've got this constant fluctuation in terms of it?
So I think it's important first to recognize that the market price of fossil fuels doesn't reflect the true cost, and that is that there are these consequences to the Earth's climate that are not reflected in the price. So somehow we need to encourage people through price mechanisms to understand that it's important to shift to these clean fuel sources. So part of the solution is making clean fuel options less expensive for people, and that's happening. The cost of solar power has fallen dramatically. Mm-hmm. That's helpful. It may also be necessary to institute some kind of a fee that would be added on to fossil fuels. We think it's an important policy approach to add to that fee to encourage people to shift. We're concerned that any revenues that might flow to the government on the basis of a fee be then redistributed back into the economy on a per household basis. So there are organizations much bigger than ours that are interested in a so-called fee and dividend policy approach, and we are as well. We're supportive of that policy.
Indeed, now you mention it, it is in this was called Global Warming, the Answer, the energy dividend. And so the whole book, written in 2007, was devoted and explains the rationale of that. The problem has become much more severe since this book was written. So we need energy fee and dividend, and all the other things which we could do to make it easier for people to survive with using less fossil fuel.
Yeah, let me see if I can elaborate a little bit on, because that's a very important point about the dividend fee that you're talking about. What you're essentially advocating here is a carbon tax, except that the tax the money from the tax would not go into government programs, but rather it would be distributed back to people. And so people who had a heavier carbon footprint would end up paying more than they would get back. People who had a lighter carbon footprint would get back more than they paid in. Is that a fair synopsis
it's
of it?
excellent, excellent.
Okay. All right. Do you believe that this proposal would be something that might be appealing to conservatives as well as liberals? With conservatives looking at this and saying, well, this is not going to finance government programs, this is going to come back to me. And it's just encouraging conservation. Liberals will like it because it'll address global warming. So it seems that this kind of a proposal has real potential for appeal within the political system. How would you react to that?
It's absolutely the conservatives' ideal program. It's using the market. It's letting the market do its thing. Mm-hmm. The market is perfect if it's given the right prices. Mm-hmm. But at the moment, it's not charged for all of the carbon that's going into the atmosphere and heating up the planet. They're charged for that, then the market can do its thing. And very rapidly, fossil fuels would drop out compared to things which are not doing damage at the same time as they provide power to us. Mm-hmm. The problem really, there are two parts to the problem. One is, how do we generate electricity, which is fairly, in a sense, fairly easy. The second one is, how do we generate transport fuels? Because you can't take an electric generator with you. Mm-hmm. And that's an area which is a bit more difficult, needs more research, and we'll get to it.
Yeah. I think to your question, Mike, both liberals and conservatives, as the evidence grows, as people understand the science, are going to be supportive of means to face the problem, meet the problem. I think the beauty, as Will said, of a fee and dividend is that it puts the emphasis on a market solution. Mm-hmm. The government is not picking winners and losers. Mm-hmm. The private sector would respond to the price signals, suppliers, that is, and consumers as well, as you suggested, would respond to it.
Mm-hmm. Has Climate Stewards addressed the role of the raising of livestock, especially cattle, in contributing to global warming through the introduction of huge quantities of methane into the atmosphere?
So cattle let off the methane. That is part of the carbon cycle, and it's been going on. It was going on in 1850. There are even more cattle, so there's even more of the methane. But the methane decays into carbon dioxide. Later on, it gets into plants. It gets eaten, and then the plants let out the animals let out but it's part of the carbon cycle. And the amount that's coming out of cattle is nothing like the amount we're going to let out in the Arctic. The amount that goes out from stored methane in the Arctic as we warm the planet up is absolutely terrifying. Sorry about that.
This is an important point that Will's raising, I think, Mike, and that has to do with feedback effects. So we've had some rise in temperature, again correlating with the carbon dioxide, but there are other greenhouse gases, and your question identifies one, and that is methane in the British pronunciation, methane in American English. Methane is stored in permafrost and as hydrate in seabeds, and if warmed enough, that escapes into the atmosphere as well. Unfortunately, methane is it's more than 20 times as effective a greenhouse gas as is carbon dioxide. And so once released, it's, I would say, impossible then, if we have this feedback effect, raising temperature, melting methane into gaseous state going into the atmosphere. It's a feedback. Will mentioned the Arctic. There are already feedback effects in the Arctic. As viewers would know, much of the sea ice in the Arctic is melting now during summer months. There's something called the albedo effect, which involves sun rays, if hitting ice or snow, reflected back into space, but without ice or snow, that's absorbed in the case of sea ice, melted, absorbed into water, snow melted, absorbed into land, and the warmer it gets, the warmer it gets. That's the nature of that feedback.
Okay. Looking back in terms of what the climate stewards are doing, there's an old saying act, think globally, but act locally. What kinds of local and state issues is your organization involved with?
We've recently had meetings with federal, as Will said, but also with state and local folks. Just yesterday, or day before yesterday, in fact, we met with the Energy Committee of the Annapolis Environmental Commission. And they're interested, among a variety of things, in climate change, in global warming. And so we looked at ways to encourage not only the city, but business owners, homeowners to turn to alternative energy sources. At the state level, we've joined a number of organizations in Maryland in asking the legislature to increase the portion of our energy, electrical energy that comes into the state, increase the renewable portion of that. And we met recently with Senator Raskin to encourage his support of that, and also to get ideas from him about other ways that we could be helpful at the state level.
What do you see as the greatest challenge today for climate activists, and are you optimistic?
I'm optimistic. I think some people may survive.
A degree of optimism, if you will. So I think that the challenge is two-part. One is understanding that there is a scientific basis, that there is a consensus among scientists that this is a real problem. And secondly, helping people figure out how they personally can take action in their own lifestyle and in how they participate in their community. City of Annapolis, State of Maryland, U.S. As well.
I'm sure that some of our viewers may be interested in learning more about climate stewards of Greater Annapolis and perhaps getting involved with your organization. How can they reach you?
Well, that would be wonderful. Again, we meet monthly. Sometimes we have additional meetings around educational topics. We're working on a website, not yet done. Hopefully will be done soon. But we do have an email address, and we welcome inquiries and certainly participation in the organization as well. So the email address, if this can be seen, CSG Annapolis, Climate Stewards of Greater Annapolis @gmail.com.
Could you repeat that for our viewers?
Sure. CSG Annapolis @gmail.com.
Thank you for viewing our program today, and please join us again on Annapolis Mosaics. If you would like more information about the Annapolis Human Relations Commission, please jot down the information on your screen. You can reach us at 410-263-7998 or by email at hrcommission@annapolis.gov. And check out our page at the City of Annapolis website. Go to www.annapolis.gov, click on City Government, then Boards and Commissions, and you can scroll down to the Human Relations Commission page. And always remember the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who said, "We have flown the air like birds and swum the seas like fishes, but have yet to learn the simple act of walking the earth as brothers and sisters."